Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to the 2022 International Public Procurement Workshop. My name is Ji-hyung Shin, working for the International Cooperation Division of the Public Procurement Service of Korea. This workshop entitled Public Procurement for Recovery and Beyond is co-hosted by the Public Procurement Service and the Open Contracting Partnership. And it's in concurrence with the 2022 Korea Public Procurement Expo, COPEX, Korea's largest public procurement exhibition. This procurement workshop is a hybrid event taking place at Kintex and online due to the prolonged pandemic, and so it's live streamed. Above all, our sincere thanks go to all the participants, both online and offline, for taking their valuable time for this gathering. For those who join through the Zoom platform, if you use wired or wireless earphones, you can conveniently watch the workshop. On top of that, we are providing simultaneous interpretation services. By clicking the interpretation button on the bottom of the Zoom screen, you can choose between Korean and English. Well, now, the 2022 International Public Procurement Workshop will commence with the welcoming video message from Dr. Jung-woo Kim, Administrator of the Public Procurement Service of Korea. He is to deliver his welcoming video message due to the lingering pandemic. So, distinguished participants, please take a look at his welcoming remarks.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I am Jung Kim, the Administrator of the Public Procurement Service of the Republic of Korea. I thought I would be able to meet you in person for this year's International Public Procurement Workshop. However, the pandemic has persisted longer than expected, which has made this gathering a hybrid event again, held both online and in person at Kintex. Above all, I would express my sincere thanks to the Open Contracting Partnership for co-hosting this workshop. I believe our collaboration will enrich this event with novel ideas for making procurement a strategic enabler for building back stronger from the pandemic and enhancing social and environmental elements in society. I would also like to welcome all the distinguished participants in this International Procurement Workshop held in connection with the 2022 Korea Public Procurement Expo. Dear procurement practitioners and experts, the pandemic has reached every corner of the globe, and the subsequent supply chain issues got many economies off track. In the face of the global challenges, public procurement has played a strategic role in facilitating economic recovery from the pandemic. In this vein, PPS has also strived to realize public procurement for recovery and beyond, putting top priority on people's safety and overcoming supply chain disruptions. In addition, the central procurer has taken ever-increasing social and environmental considerations such as increased growth and carbon neutrality in its procurement activities. Thus, I hope this event will serve as a platform to share experts' insights for advancing economic recovery from the pandemic and enhancing social and green values through the strategic use of public procurement. Once again, my sincere gratitude goes to all the distinguished speakers and session chairs. I would also like to thank the online participants from all around the world in various time zones for taking their valuable time to join the event. And finally, I hope this pandemic will end this year so as to welcome you all to Korea next spring. Thanks.
PPS administrator gave us his insights on the roles of public procurement through his welcoming remarks. And next, Mr. Gavin Heyman, Executive Director of Open Contracting Partnership, will deliver his virtual keynote speech. So please take a look at Mr. Gavin Heyman's inspiring remarks.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me with you today. I'm Gavin Heyman and I'm honoured to work for the Open Contracting Partnership. I think many of you know us, but we're a public charity spun out of the World Bank and we work across government, business and civil society in over 30 countries to open up and transform public procurement. We aren't after just a bit more transparency, we're really after a fundamental improvement in how procurement is done, especially as we seek to build back better from COVID and as we seek to transition our economies to be more sustainable, to be cleaner and to be greener. So it's a real pleasure to be addressing you at the start of COPEX today, as it brings so many smart reformers together at once to think through how we can do procurement better. I'm super excited that I'll actually be with you in person tomorrow when our time zones are more aligned. Director Kim, though, asked me to share a couple of opening reflections. So first of all, let's just remind ourselves of just how important public procurement is and how important it will be for the coming economic recovery. Around the world, the total amount spent on procurement is about $13 trillion every year, a stack of dollar bills all the way to the moon and back again. And as you know, it's vital for delivering public services, the roads, the schools and the hospitals upon which we all depend. And given the scale of procurement, doing it better can have a huge multiplier effect on the economy, and particularly encouraging innovation and small businesses. Yet at the same time, we've all seen how procurement has struggled with antiquated, paper-based processes, poor coordination and lousy data during the pandemic. And we've all felt what it means when our government can't procure vital personal protective equipment or medicines effectively and efficiently. It's been a heartbreaking fact that emergency procedures during the pandemic have sometimes been abused and malfeasance has been rife. And even before the pandemic, we know there's a real gap between the amount of money paid and the quality of the goods and services delivered to citizens. The IMF said for infrastructure worldwide, that gap was almost 30%. So it gives you some idea there's an opportunity for a huge improvement here that will make a difference to all of us. We need to change procurement from a slow, paper-based, bureaucratic approach that really favours insiders to a smart, user-friendly, public digital service that promotes competition, innovation and economic inclusion. And there are some great examples, of course, what is possible out there. Thanks, for example, to Korea's CONEPS and other best practices like Ukraine's Prozoro open contracting reforms. We know that transformational change is possible. So, at this COPEX, we're going to be hearing from many of the world's leading innovators on how to manage that transition. We're going to hear about the transformational power of data, open data, and digitization across the entire cycle of public contracts. We're also going to hear how that data can inform better planning, as well as the tendering and award of contracts, and also better tracking of the spending and delivery of results for citizens. Secondly, we're going to hear about the power of working across government, business and civil society to build collaborative, multi-stakeholder approaches to procurement reforms. If we want to fundamentally power up procurement, we have to design things with citizens and businesses, not just for them. so they can see the information that is of value to them to encourage them to participate in public contracting. And thirdly, we're going to explore the frontiers of what is possible, especially as we transition to reduce carbon and increase the sustainability of our economies. To go green, we're going to have to buy things in a fundamentally different way, and we'll be exploring from many of the world's leading reformers about how to do that. And of course, the Korean Public Procurement Service will be a thought leader on all these topics. So we'll be excited to hear about the innovations within Korea, the future of CONEPs, especially as you adopt leading best practices like the Open Contracting Data Standard and as you use advanced data analytics to power up Korea's economic recovery. So it's going to be an action-packed COPEX. Thank you very much for inviting the Open Contracting Partnership as a partner, and our whole team is really excited for the coming event. Thank you again.
Distinguished participants, we have some technical issues, so we will start session 1 at 2:30 in Seoul local time. So we kindly ask for your understanding for that. Thank you.
계신 거잖아. 그래서 우리한테 주고 계신 거잖아. 그러면 오디오가 들어가는 게 다시 한번 해줘. 들어와. 원음으로. 하나 둘. 안 들어와. 삐지는 들어가? 삐지만 들어올 순 없잖아. 그러면 어쨌든 토크랩 잠깐만 좀 살려줘 볼래? 하나 둘. 들어와. 그러면 들어가는 거 확인되고 어느까지 들어가는 거 확인되고 그러면 여기에서 나가는 소리가 다시 또 타고 들어가는 거만 다시 한번 하나 둘. 안 들어가? 난 만질 것도 없어. 하나 둘. 안 돌아? 안 도는 게 정상이야. 들어가. 원은? 다시 한번 그럼 원음으로 한 번만 체크해 볼게요. 네.
이대로 가. 꺾이지 마. 더 이상 얘기하지 마. 오케이. 시장님.
네. 하나 둘. 여기서는 안 넘어가고. 오케이. 아니 그거 넘어가는 거. 꺼도 돼.
All right, session 1 will commence now. For those who join through the Zoom platform, you can conveniently use interpretation function by clicking the interpretation button in the bottom of the Zoom screen. You can readily choose Korean and English. As you all know, the 2022 International Public Procurement Workshop takes place under the main theme of public procurement for recovery and beyond, which is timely and relevant, commensurate with the current situation public procurement has faced. Under the main theme, Session 1 is entitled Building Back Stronger Through Public Procurement, with insightful presentations of our panelists. This session will be moderated by Professor Man-gi Kim, head of the Center for Global Public Procurement, KAIST Business College. So, without further ado, I'd like to turn the floor over to Professor Man-gi Kim.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome, everyone, to Korean Public Procurement Expo 2022. My name is Professor Man-gi Kim from KAIST School of Business. Today's topic is about how public procurement to facilitate economic recovery from COVID-19 pandemic. Last couple of years, especially last 2 years, our social life, economic life has been seriously impacted by the COVID pandemic. Now we have almost a new norm. Keep the distance, working from home and wearing mask all the time. And also the way we operate our economic activity has been changed. According to the survey in the United States, even after pandemic, more than 60% of the workforce in the United States, they still like to work from home at least 1 day a week. So we can say these are new norm and we accept it as new social behavior. For global economy, we had one of the worst recession since World War II. And we had a major global supply chain management disruption. We had enormous difficulty to source personal protective equipment. Vaccination also was a huge issue. Because of the global distribution and disrupted, we had a different approach from different countries, and also even with distribution of vaccination has many different angles. So when we look at economic recovery on a global scale, we can see disparity and also inequality, how advanced economy, such as OECD member country and emerging country and underdeveloped country, they have very different momentum. They have very different way to implement a policy to recover from COVID-19 pandemic. According to World Bank and IMF, advanced economy, OECD member country, they will have a most likely 5 to 6% of global recovery and also the GDP and the growth this year. However, for emerging country and developing country, their economic recovery will be much lower. We're talking about 3 to 4%. Of course, still China will do pretty well, more than 7%. However, if you take China out, overall global emerging economy and underdeveloped country will be still suffering from impact of the pandemic. So as a public procurement contracting authority and practitioner expert in our field, we like to see what can we do, what we as a public procurement stakeholder can do to boost economic activity and attribute our talent, our experience to recover global economy. So today's session is how different organizations, such as the UN and Development Bank, like Asian Development Bank, what was their initiative and how they've been doing it, what is their main policy, how they actually build the resiliency in the public procurement system to boost the economy. I mean, we have a lot to contribute as a public procurement stakeholders. We can make a more robust policy change to design public procurement and acquisition system to establish more sustainable public procurement. And also we can reestablish disrupted actually global supply chain management channel. We can do more dynamic actually and digital economy implementation such as e-procurement, ESG compliance, and open access to more competitive and a more dynamic solution for our evaluation and also the practice of the global public procurement. And more importantly, I think proactive planning and ongoing risk management of public procurement is also a very important element. So at the end of the day, our key value is value for money. How can we establish a transparent and fair and reasonable evaluation criteria to achieve the value for the money? So to achieve what we want to see and how the public procurement sector contributing to rebuild local economy, and I first invited Dr. Hansen from UNDP as head of the UNDP procurement expert. He will be talking about the pivoting from pandemic to more responsible public procurement. So it'll be very interesting how UNDP is a leading international organization to put emphasis on public procurement and sustainability as a mechanism to build the economic activity from pandemic. Followed by UNDP, and we have the good opportunity to invite Mr. Jeffrey Taylor from ADB, Asian Development Bank. He is the director of the ADB practice, and he is going to talk about the public procurement for recovery and beyond the ADB. Obviously, as we know, the ADB has a focus in Asian country, is a member state. What type of the policy and resources they had in the last 2 years, what was their activity, and what is their roadmap to help the ADB member country to recover their economic activity. It'll be very interesting because multilateral development bank, as we know, we have World Bank and African Development Bank and EBRD and ADB as one of the major development banks. They have political neutrality, and they have economic horsepower to help many member states in Asian country. So we had the opportunity to look at two international organizations, UN and also Asian Development Bank. I also had a unique opportunity to invite practitioners in the field from Bangladesh. Andrew Smith is executive from one of the leading healthcare provider in Bangladesh, Dhaka. He's going to talk about how actually they work together with the USAID, UK, British AID and ODA agency, and Asian Infrastructure Development Bank and ADB, and many other international bank and development agency to recover from COVID-19 pandemic. I think his view will be very important because we first had opportunity to look at what UN as a global authority for public procurement doing it in terms of recovering a pandemic. And also we have the bank point of view and the Asian Development Bank point of view, how they actually boost the local economy using their financial resources, infrastructure they have it. Now, what they have at the policy, the making, the procedure and processes, how actually it is working with recipient country like Bangladesh. As you know, Bangladesh is one of the poorest countries in the past, but by 2026, Bangladesh will be graduating from what we call the poorest country list. So they're very busy to rebuild the economic infrastructure, especially for their social, their safety network and healthcare industry have enormous actually in growth last couple of years. So we'll have this unique opportunity, and I hope everyone will have a little bit different angle to understand. So the order of the presentation today will be, first, I'd like to invite Dr. Hansen from UNDP and ADB, and followed by Andrew Smith from Bangladesh. The question, I will pose some of the question and the common question from the audience. If you have any question, you may text your question. But each question will be addressed at the end of each presentation. And after Andrew Smith's presentation, I will come in and wrap up our discussion. So let's welcome Dr. Carsten Hansen from UNDP, hearing his presentation about pivoting from pandemic to more responsible public procurement. Dr. Hansen.
All right, thank you. My name is Carsten Hansen. I'm the Chief of Global Procurement Services at UNDP. I've been asked to come in and share a little bit about our experiences in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic and the public procurement support that we provided to governments during the pandemic, and also somewhat the lessons learned on sustainability and how we have integrated sustainable procurements, specifically social responsible procurement, into our practices following the COVID pandemic. So for the presentation today, I'll talk a little bit about the COVID crisis, the global supply chains implications, a little bit of the background around socioeconomic crisis and procurement and how that interrelates, revisiting procurement due diligence and how that impacts on sustainable procurement, and where to start in taking that agenda forward. And then finally, I would like to present a sustainability-weighted procurement portfolio model that we have developed, which also addresses social responsibility. But going back to the COVID-19 procurement response, I think for many procurement practitioners, this was really the perfect procurement storm, if you wish. We had a situation where there was an excessive demand for PPE and medical equipment, addressing the COVID-19 response for many governments, basically across the 50 plus key categories shared by WHO at the time, including PPE masks, medical equipment, ventilators, etc. And what really happened was that we experienced a global stockout of PPE and medical equipment, partly induced by restricted production due to manufacturing lockdowns. So the production facilities themselves closed down, and therefore, because people were restricted to come to work at the time. So therefore, of course, production ceased or was restricted. Secondly, many governments imposed export controls and bans. So many governments where we usually would have suppliers producing, let's say, ventilators, suddenly would say, look, we no longer allow the export of these ventilators until that the national demand for ventilators has been met. So many of our usual suppliers were simply unable to provide access to and deliver these ventilators or other equipment that we were asking for. Thirdly, we also noted flight restrictions impacting cargo movement, and the price just went through the sky at the time. So we would have an excessive cost of moving cargo around if and when we were actually able to find space on existing flights. So in terms of the stockout, we experienced a global market demand to supply ratio, which was basically 20-1. I've never seen anything like that before, but basically that means that for every ventilator we had, there were demand 20 times bigger. So this, of course, put a huge amount of pressure on terms of price, in terms of delivery, and in terms of access. This very particular global supply environment really saw the rise of many very opportunistic suppliers as well. So basically, WHO had to issue a global medical product alert for falsified medical products, simply due to the rise of fraudulent certifications of substandard equipment that suddenly appeared on the market. Because there were many suppliers who generally would be manufacturing other but maybe similar items that then reoriented their operations and supply lanes to address these particular target items which were in such high demand. So I think for those who are monitoring the media, it was basically described as the global rush for medical equipment. It was equivalent to the Wild West. We had scenarios where we had planes that were already packed with medical equipment or PPE that were suddenly diverted to a different destinations as prices and competitive bidding was taking place, even on the runways or on the tarmac, as if you wish, of international airports around the world. You can read more of this, of course, in our blog that we have sent out, but also if you go back and Google some of the media, you will see exactly the supply conditions. So this public procurement scenario had many disruptive dimensions. One of them was particularly around the temporal disruption, if you will. Basically, there was an unprecedented and forced acceleration of procurement procedures. And public procurement in general, of course, is notable for being, I wouldn't say slow, but very particular. We are the custodians of taxpayers' money, and we have an obligation to be transparent and fair. And through that objective, we have certain procedures that needs to be followed. But suddenly, because of the emergency nature of the global stockout situation, many of these public purchasing practices were accelerated. The second, of course, was the competition disruption because of this inversion of the characteristics of the public purchasing market. Basically, the buyers became, from a buyer's market, it became a seller's market. So the entire global marketplace basically was put on its head. So it was the sellers who were suddenly determining what were the conditions under which they would sell their items to buyers rather than the other way around. Frankly, this also meant an epistemological disruption, if you wish, a crisis of legitimacy. Governments that were not able to procure vital goods in time basically didn't meet their mandate to govern. And this really pitted governments against each other. So there was a strong disadvantage, if you wish, from the smaller public buyers versus those of bigger governments. And there was a lot of big governments as well, leveraging their size and strength to access these items in such a high demand at the expense often at smaller countries or buyers or entities in that sense. And finally, of course, there was a geographic disruption. Pandemic highlighted the limitations in cross-border trade. There's been a lot of subsequent discussions about the reversal of globalization due to these supply chain disruptions that we saw during this period of time. So a lot of disruption that impacted in many different dimensions in the public procurement space. So just to run through, what we were seeing here was basically a market which turned from a buyer's market to a seller's market. So we had sellers basically setting the price. Often we had to accelerate the procurement processes. The sellers would say you would need to commit and place a purchase order within 24 hours. Other than that, if we don't receive your purchase order signed and ready, we will simply go to the next buyers because it was a seller's market. Also, we had a scenario where we have clients shopping around, and we were really challenged in terms of our funding availability. If you have to place a purchase order within 24 hours, you really need to secure that the funding was available and didn't need to be subsequently approved. So a big strain on our normal procurement processes, if you wish, and really sort of the need to have access to funding that we could commit within this very small window of time. We were also challenged in many ways in terms of our terms and conditions, which we normally use on the market space. For instance, we don't normally allow for demand for advance payments. This is one of those things that now that it was a seller's market, there was often a requirement to come up with advance payments, which is really a challenging request in terms of our policies and for many public procurement entities. Also, we had to work with many suppliers that we hadn't worked with before, and often there wasn't time to get bank guarantees, etc., for many of these processes. So really a high-risk environment for many in the public procurement space due to these new demands that sellers came up with. Also, we saw many suppliers sort of disregarding commitments to take advantage of new and more attractive prices. They were basically a competitive environment where buyers would go in and overbid each other even after the purchase order had been placed, which basically meant that you couldn't even be sure if you had placed a purchase order if that purchase order would be honored. And then finally, there was in that space, there's been a lot of discussion about how this undermined transparency and open competition, simply because many of the normal procedures were challenged during this particular emergency situation. So in the sort of post-COVID-19 environment, there's been a lot of conversation within the academic space on what did that mean for public procurement in the future. So as an overview, I think from a risk analysis perspective, there were really three key areas that was a challenge. First was the quality assurance. How could we, in that environment, with the very limited time and the short window for placing purchase orders, how could you ensure as a public buyer that your quality assurance policies were really adhered to, and how could you do the proper due diligence on that quality assurance from usually suppliers that you may not have worked with before. So in our case, we had a quality assurance team which was heavily augmented because we really needed to go through each of those new processes, reviewing each of those new suppliers and their very particular products that they were offering so that we could meet our quality assurance requirements. Second one was, of course, the fraudulent certifications, which links to the quality assurance. We saw a high increase of fraudulent certifications on health equipment. And this, again, really required that you had an on-the-ground presence to go and follow up with the manufacturers that you were working with and really have a good quality assurance team that went into the details, checked if the certifications were valid and were not fraudulent. And then finally, the subject of this conversation here, which is about supply chain transparency and particularly about human rights violations in global supply chains. So coming back to the global stockout situation, the COVID-19 environment was such that the socioeconomic fabric of everything that we have known was really challenged. So with this global stockout, we saw an amplification of labor violations. We saw the change of balance basically between workers and employees, which really challenged many of the regulations around working environment, oversight of that, and the monitoring of manufacturing. There was a very good quote in an article, I believe, from the UK, which said, when the ship is sinking, you no longer question the context in which the life jackets were manufactured. And I think this is perhaps a very a good capture of the sentiment, right? This was an emergency. Every public buyer was out to get the PPE and medical equipment that their governments needed. And during that time, there was perhaps less time to go into the depth of checking whether the supply chains that we were buying from was really what they pretended to be. And as our UN Secretary General said, the pandemic has become far more than a public health emergency. It is really an economic crisis, a social crisis, and becoming a human rights crisis. And that is also the case, in my view, in terms of the wider supply chain scenario that we experienced. So just to come back to what do we mean by social responsibility in supply chains? For instance, forced labor. Forced labor is actually a phenomenon that we knew well before COVID-19. The 2017 global estimates of modern slavery suggested that almost 25 million people worked under forced labor conditions. So this is really a phenomenon that existed pre-COVID-19, but as the COVID-19 happened, many of those monitoring systems which would check really were challenged. Unfortunately, moving forward, we take note that forced labor and the need for having transparency in supply chains is actually going to increase. As automation and robotics start taking over more and more jobs, many people would actually be even more vulnerable moving forward in terms of their role in and position within global supply chains. Some of the drivers around responsible sourcing actually links directly to legislation and regulatory requirements. I'll come to that. There is emerging legislation at the national level, which is becoming very clear on what the obligations are from buyers, particularly in the private sector. But also there's consumer sentiment and talent retention. Many, frankly, younger people would rather not work for a company that doesn't have a clear CSR articulated mandate and vision for how they want to take that forward. Here's a couple of clips that I took from this is an H&M shop, I believe, last year, which, as you can see, is really focused on the social responsibility aspect. And then the third bit is the opportunities that we have for digitalized data, allowing effective use of AI and supply chain analysis. We have the opportunity now to really devise tools that can automate much of the due diligence and help us provide that level of visibility in supply chains. So what does that mean for public procurement? Well, public procurement is basically a sleeping giant. It is estimated to be around $12 trillion worth of leverage on the market space. So as and when global public procurement steps in and fulfills, let's say, social responsibility, due diligence requirements in their tendering or the wider sustainability considerations, it really has an impact on the market. $12 trillion in the market is really something that can move things. So we like to refer to this process as waking the trillion-dollar giant, where we link sustainability targets and national sustainability targets to the actual procurement operations of those governments. So just coming back to what are some of the drivers, of course, of corporate responsibility and social responsible procurement. We have, of course, the normative framework going back to the UN Guiding Principles, the ILO's Tripartite Declaration of Principles, the OECD Due Diligence Guidelines, and of course the UN Global Compact. Those were normative frameworks. But what has happened since is that there's a growing body of national legislation, both in the US, starting of course from the California Transparency in Supply Chains Act of 2012, to of course in Europe and Australia, latest in where we had the UK Modern Slavery Act 2015, and up until now the Australian Modern Slavery Act 2018. And frankly, latest, the EU Draft Directive on Corporate Due Diligence, Corporate Accountability of 2021, which puts in place due diligence requirements for anybody operating in EU or outside the EU, but having a market in the EU. So on that background, and noting, of course, the COVID-19 implications on or requirements for enhanced due diligence in supply chains, we of course also look at, well, where do you start? I mean, what are the particular categories that you need to look at in terms of implementing social responsibility in your supply chain? So what we did was we developed what's called a procurement portfolio model, a PPM model, but with an ESG lens. So basically the model was designed to identify and visualize organization-specific ESG procurement liabilities and allow for an organization to prioritize how to implement its sustainability efforts across which categories that was most important. And basically the model allows a two-step presentation or approach. Step one, it allows us to develop a segmentation model reflecting category-specific sustainability risk profiles across each of the categories. What are the categories that we buy, which carries the highest liability or exposure towards various sustainability indicators? That could be environmental, it could be social responsibility issues like forced labor, it could be other aspects across the ESG spectrum. And then secondly, the model allows us basically to develop a market and supply engagement strategy for how, once you know what categories you are prioritizing, how do you develop meaningful strategies to go to the market, to engage with your suppliers on how to improve your social responsibility or sustainability efforts at large. So we have decided to take a category-specific approach, realizing that sustainable procurement and social responsible procurement as well is very category-specific. In my organization, we buy more than 1,000 categories a year, and therefore you need to have a very specific focus on which categories are the most important. So when you take those categories and you look at the spend across each of these categories and you matrix it with the sustainability risks, we develop what we call the sustainability portfolio risk matrix, basically looking at where are the areas, what are the categories where we spend the most, and where are the categories where we have the biggest risks. So if you look at the matrix here, you would basically come out with a portfolio visualization that shows you which categories are low risk with a low impact, low risk potentially with a high impact, meaning that you have a high expenditure in that category, or high risk, low impact, or high risk, high impact, meaning those categories which are high risk are basically the ones which carries the most liabilities and exposure for sustainability risk. Linking that to the market strategies, you can see if you're in a low risk, low impact category, you will not have much leverage on the market. So basically the recommendation is to follow the market standards, link up to somebody who has a higher leverage in that area and follow the leader. But if you do have leverage, and if you're in a high risk, high impact environment, it's a strategic category for you where you could go ahead and engage with your suppliers. Due to your leverage, you potentially have the opportunity for innovation and transformation of that particular industry, that particular market, as you introduce more and better sustainability measures in your engagement. Here's a nice clip, I think, of a dynamic ESG weighted procurement portfolio model, how it looks. Just going back here, I'll come into more detail on this, but basically the way that we put it together, it allows us to slice and dice. So you can look at what is your aggregated sustainability risk visualization, what is your particular exposure across environmental issues, forced labor issues, and other particular sustainability indicators. And those indicators that we've used here include both social responsibility indicators, environmentally responsibility indicators around climate change, resource use, biodiversity, etc., governance, and economics. But coming back to social responsibility risk indicators, we're looking specifically at human rights, violations of indigenous peoples' rights specifically, but also, of course, forced labor, child labor, working conditions related risks. So this is really wage and working hours, health and safety, like in a category like construction. Health and safety is a big issue and one that one needs to reflect on if you're engaging in that category. We also include gender issues and product-specific health and well-being implications. So the way that we determine the sustainability risk is we look at the entire supply chain, if you wish, of that particular category or product group. We look at the raw materials, we look at the material production, manufacturing, transportation, retail use, and disposal. So waste, of course, and waste management is a big part of that. And then we rate them to low risk, medium high risk, and high risk. And then we insert that into our database, which allows us to do the slice and dice, if you wish, on any of those identified indicators for any of those particular categories that we are concerned about. So if we look at the aggregate ESG risk analysis, you can see a visualization. Here's like a portfolio analysis of an organization. You can see here that the ones marked in red are the high risk, high leverage areas. So those are the particular categories which for this particular organization represents the biggest liability and opportunity for implementing social responsibility and sustainability strategies in general. If you go as the topic here on social responsibility into labor rights issues, you can see here identifying again top categories where the social responsibility issues are the highest. Here including, of course, construction work, but also hospitality like hotels, etc., which carries a high labor rights risk and therefore needs a particular engagement. And then again here, you can see how we slice and dice it. You can have your aggregates visualization on sustainability risks, but you could also go in and look at what is my particular environmental footprint, what is my forced labor exposure, and how do those categories match? What measures should I particularly take to avoid forced labor in a particular portfolio? So basically, this tool allows organizations to differentiate categories in accordance with sustainability risk profiles and develop targeted guidelines for each of those categories. This allows a prioritization of resources and really to identify what are the categories where you have the high. A quick breakdown of some of our experiences around the COVID-19 emergency procurement that we had, some of the implications for public procurement in general, and also a presentation of a tool that we've developed that helps us as an organization to identify what are the categories where we have the biggest opportunity to enhance our social responsibility or wider sustainability agenda. So thank you very much and wish you a good workshop. Thank you.
Dr. Hansen, a great presentation as usual, and thank you very much for bringing a very important subject to Korean and also a global audience, how the public procurement sector can attribute to build a post-COVID-19 economy. I'd like to pose one question. As you correctly pointed out, I mean, we had a very serious global supply chain management crisis for the PP and many other, healthcare sector. And we had also serious issue with sustainable public procurement because of prolonged procurement process and procedure. And also, as we know, we have very uneven economic recovery for the advanced economy versus emerging country. And we can see a lot of difficulty and different anger. This is one of, I think, key policy maker tasks to resolve it. As the UN, as UNDP, a procurement practitioner and expert, how do you see inequality and uneven recovery in the view of sustainable public procurement? In other words, how the public procurement and sustainable public procurement will bridge, narrow the gap between economic recovery of advanced economy and emerging or underdeveloped country. Thank you.
No, thank you for the question. There's definitely a lot of inequality in terms of how the COVID-19 response eventually rolled out. Primarily in the first case about access to medical equipment. So as explained, when the global stockout happened, basically much of this equipment became unavailable to public procurement in the first place. Because of these export bans that were imposed by the national governments, much of this equipment and PPE was actually exchanged through intergovernmental arrangements. And of course, then in many ways, this equipment was also politicized. So this was something that was often granted as part of a political agenda. So if you had good allies or good friends, then you may get access. If not, of course, you would not have that access. Also, as prices increased, for instance, ventilators, which usually would cost around $7,000, $8,000 a piece, suddenly would go for $40,000 or $50,000 a piece. This kind of equipment suddenly became out of reach for many governments. And therefore, of course, it became really a reflection of economic inequality reflected against access to health. So that's one element of inequality. The other aspect, of course, is that supply chain resilience has been shown to be directly linked, if you wish, to health infrastructure and healthcare preparedness, and logistics infrastructure, and general income levels, because that determined the resilience of those countries in which those supply chains were operating. So supply chain resilience is direct linkage as well to, of course, the government's ability to provide sufficient healthcare and healthcare preparedness, therefore not having to lock down so dramatically because the healthcare infrastructure was in place to absorb the consequences, if you wish, of the pandemic. So again, an example of inequality, as of course all governments and countries do not have equal healthcare preparedness. In terms of implications for sustainable procurement practices, I would like to think that the lessons learned from the pandemic really put a spotlight on social responsibility issues, how socioeconomic implications, particularly linked to labor, to migrant labor, to casual labor, and the balance between employees and employers under those circumstances. That whole focus on social responsibility, on transparency in supply chains, I really think that is a positive outcome of the COVID supply chain disruption, because now we really understand those implications. And also, of course, there has been a questioning of the viability of globalization in its current form. And many companies and governments, of course, evaluating whether or not there's dependencies across certain categories, which they are not comfortable with anymore. So many health-related categories perhaps become more strategic, and therefore most likely will be onshored or back, so that there's a national capacity to develop those product groups in the future. That would be my expectation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kelsten Hansen, for sharing your profound insights. Now, our next speaker is Mr. Jeff Taylor, Director of Procurement Division of Asia Development Bank. Mr. Jeff Taylor has been working on infrastructure procurement for 35 years. It is with great pleasure that we would welcome Mr. Jeff Taylor to give us his presentation.
Yeah, hello, can everyone see me and the presentation? Could you please confirm I can be seen and the presentation seen? Oh, sorry, I saw the message in chat. Okay, thank you very much. Well, hello everybody, and it's a pleasure to be here with our partners at KAIST and the Public Procurement Service of Korea, longtime partners of ADB, and I'm delighted to be here. And certainly the last 2 years have been some of the most interesting of my career, and it puts me in mind what I never realized was a curse. May you live in interesting times. The times have been far too interesting over the last couple of years. But you know, it's important that we learn from what's happened. And moving on to, sorry, I have to mess around a bit. Okay. Moving on to COVID-19 and its impact. We really did see, as was sorry, I'm trying to get rid of something in the way. We really have seen a rapid economic contraction across Asia and the Pacific in many countries. And we're continuing to see it with the speed of recovery post the height of the pandemic. It's not over yet. Hopefully it will become an epidemic and then something more akin to the seasonal flu. And I'm sincerely hoping for that to be very soon. But it revealed weaknesses and interdependencies in global supply chains that were touched upon in the previous presentation. And that was in PPE, that was in vaccine raw materials, that was in vaccine delivery systems, that was in cross-border shutdowns, that was in logistics, that was in air freight, across the board. And at ADB, we're primarily an infrastructure bank. And it had knock-on effects in terms of infrastructure as well and raw materials. And we're actually seeing similar things happening with what's happening in Eastern Europe right now. And that's impacting upon, obviously, fuel, that's impacting upon fertilizer, that's impacting upon foodstuffs. So unfortunately, our times continue to be more interesting than I would wish. The impact was particularly felt in developing member countries, especially those predicated on tourism and agriculture, for example, and also across small and medium enterprises without cash reserves and the ability to ride out the pandemic. Large corporations with more resources were better placed. It has led in part to some good things, the acceleration of remote working and the better use of technology. Just as we're using right now, and the ability to interact and meet with people more readily using technology. Although, of course, I think many of us, like me, miss the human interaction that comes with the old model of doing things. So what can be done across my client base, internal and external, to maintain the transparency, because the governance risks have just gone up because of the emergency. It allows wider access to a broader market, and it lowers transaction costs. ADB over the years has been a very strong together on this initiative very successfully. And if we look from 2015, the value of ADB finance projects using e-procurement was just 13. And 2.2 billion in 2015. And we look at how much that has climbed in 2021. I can't actually see the number, something from Zoom is in the way, but about $9 billion. So there has been a very significant increase in the use of e-procurement for very good reasons. And that was actually also accelerated. ADB recognized the need for e-procurement systems in countries that didn't have them. So we actually procured an e-procurement portal and allowed our borrowers to use it for 2 years with no charge to themselves. Our expectation is that they will now build their own resilient and nation-specific e-procurement systems. This is how it's distributed across ADB's portfolio. This, of course, does not reflect the overall adoption of e-procurement within ADB's member countries. It only reflects the ADB financing being channeled. So typically it mirrors ADB's portfolio of where we are lending: agriculture, natural resources, education, energy, high-level technology, and so forth. Our lending is predominantly, though, in the transport and energy sectors, so the largest proportion of e-procurement use is found in those sectors. South Asia, again, will lead by value, with 57% of all electronic procurement in ADB's portfolio being focused there. And then that's primarily because India is our biggest borrower, but also has a very well-evolved e-procurement system. Much better than some Western European countries, to be honest. It's actually a pretty good system. And it is going further and integrating into financial management systems, budget systems, personnel systems, and so forth, as a high-functioning, comprehensive end-to-end e-procurement system. China is the other big contributor to this. China has a very strong IT background and industry, and much of their procurement has been done through procuring agencies on behalf of ministries and executing agencies for a number of years. And they are using electronic procurement systems and have been for some time. There have been some significant developments over the last 2 or 3 years. The use of blockchain in India would be one, where there are multiple electronic government procurement systems. India, if you don't know, is a federation. Procurement legislation and rules in each of the states. But the federation actually provide free of charge to all of the states that choose to use it, a pretty good e-procurement system, and the majority of them do. With that comes the need to validate vendor credentials. I note that was touched upon in the previous presentation as well. And blockchain is an excellent tool of really establishing the bona fide or the trustworthiness and the truth of what a vendor is telling you within the procurement system. It allows the GP system to publish contracts as verifiable digital data that can be reused to evidence experience and so forth. And vendors will only need to refer to the work experience in the blockchain and not recreate engineers' completion certificates, contracts, and so forth to validate their experience. It removes duplicates and redundant work. It's an online trusted repository for all experience. But it also has other uses. For example, banks submitting bank guarantees and so forth within the e-procurement system. Another good news story is system in Bhutan has processed 6,500 packages and supports 141 government departments and has 6,800 users. There's a link there which will describe a lot more of this in ADB's annual procurement report, and as that's prepared by my team, I would very much encourage you to have a look at it at your leisure. Public procurement and managing supply chains risks. Lessons learned in the procurement and supply chain over the last 2 years. Bottlenecks, border closures, price gouging have highlighted the over-reliance on limited sources with single points of failure. There is a lack of resilience or backup in supplies, and we have little visibility of the supply chains we're actually engaging with. We're only seeing the tier 1, and we have limited understanding and visibility of tier 2 and 3. That also feeds into environmental and social risks in the supply chain if you're only dealing with tier 1. The interconnectedness of global trade has many advantages, primarily economic. advantages. If we go back to Adam Smith and the Wealth of Nations and William Porter's work on the comparative wealth and comparative competitive advantage. There's a just-in-time model where you buy at the lowest cost in the globalized economy, but also there has been developing a just-in-case model. Do I develop domestic capacity just in case this risk manifests? And the evolving role in public procurement systems and the expectations of those that they serve is to mitigate risk on over-reliance of supply sources and encourage local and regional production of key strategic products. We're talking with a number of our borrowers about the potential financing of vaccine manufacturing, multi-use facilities, so that they are not over-reliant on production facilities and suppliers outside of the environments that they can exercise some control over. Mainly because of what they've seen in the pandemic, the vaccine nationalism and the ring fencing of resources by richer countries. Many of our borrowers don't want to actually face that again. Also the need to stock up on strategic reserves of critical supply equipment, critical equipment at a country or regional level. The use of of procurement data to monitor stocks, lead times and reordering points. A range of methods in bid evaluation depending on complexity and criticality. One of the things that ADB has also done, again at the bottom of the slide, is mapped out supply chains based on big data. So you can actually have a look to see which companies, which area, geographical regions are supplying the most globally. And again, I would encourage anyone with the time to have a look at that. Another way of building back and looking at this, not just based on price, is look at merit point criteria and consider using those instead of just the least cost solution. Getting away from the lowest price bid to the one that offers the greatest value. And that could include weighted criteria consistent with ADB and a client's development objectives and building those into bidding documents. It could be around gender, it could be around environment, it could be around health and safety, it could be around the sustainability of the lower tier supply chains. Many ways and many factors could be considered. And merit points are assigned to all bids that pass the qualification criteria, and it can either be a pass-fail or it could be used as a weighted criteria and compared with price. Sustainable procurement. My friend at George Washington University, Dan Gordon, professor of public procurement, since retired, hated this term because it was so broad. I take the opposite view. I like it because it's so broad. It means many things, but on the whole, it's something we have to do because all of the things that it may mean are extremely important. We're looking at strategic supplier relationships, long-term ones that are mutually beneficial. We're looking at eco-efficiency and sustainability of benefits. We're looking at financial return on investment. We're looking at risk reduction. We're looking at labor. We're looking at greening procurement, reducing pollution, developing knowledge, developing the private sector, promoting cultural inclusion and gender inclusion, supporting local skills, supporting local employment, institutional strengthening, and building systems for the future. So sustainable procurement, I think it is really the most important task for public procurement to do well over the coming years. Going back to the third bullet here, price is merely one aspect to consider. Sometimes cheap is expensive. The pillars of sustainable procurement are essentially environmental, social, economic, and institutional. The environment, fairly obvious. Social, supporting the community. Economic, stimulating and prudent economic use of the resources allocated for public procurement. And institutional, building effective institutions in the longer term. And I particularly like this one because it means if we do it well, ADB has an impact beyond the narrow confines of the project with its financing, and leaves the institutions that it's working with stronger and better once that project is implemented. And again, plenty more references in the box below, including the UN Sustainable Development Goals in acknowledgement of our UN partners at this presentation. Thank you very much. Sustainability and strategic procurement planning. It has to start at the very beginning with the plan. And for ADB, this is when, ADB is a bank. We don't regularly undertake procurement operations ourselves. We undertake the financing of projects. So it will start with country partnership strategy at the very beginning. And this is where we agree with our borrowers, really the space in which ADB will operate over the next 3 to 5 years. From that, we will have a shopping list of projects that we expect to finance. We then go through with each of those projects with a high-level project concept note. But the real substantive work comes in at procurement planning, where we go in to design a procurement plan, a procurement risk assessment, and a project administration manual that informs the factors that will carry through into the bidding documents and inform the evaluative and qualification criteria, and ultimately determine the contractor that will get awarded the contract, or supplier or consultant, as the case may be. Following on from that, when these indicators are used as described as sustainable in the previous slide, we will expect there to be contractual mechanisms to ensure their enforcement and delivery through the life cycle of the project. And then going on to contract award, implementation and contract management, and feedback and evaluation to really assess how effective the approach was, how value for money was delivered, how the sustainable objectives were secured. Here is a list of some of the guidance material you may wish to look at as well. There's, I've mentioned these before, but we have the 2021 annual procurement report published in 2022, but covering ADB finance procurement in 2021. That's hyperlinked here. A guidance note on strategic procurement planning, which informs ADB staff and its borrowers of the steps that we expect to see and to be undertaken through the strategic procurement planning process. A guidance note on sustainable public procurement, which really presents not all, but some of the choices and considerations that should be made when undertaking strategic procurement planning. And the last one, the use of merit point criteria for bid evaluation, how to weight and how to factor these into a procurement transaction. And again, I encourage you to read those. There are actually another 22 guidance notes there. So, sorry, 23 guidance notes. We have 26 in total on various aspects of ADB procurement operations. Professor Kim has a copy. A copy of each. He knows how much there is. But these will be valuable reference materials for anyone wishing to undertake a deep dive into ADB's procurement system and expectations of those borrowing money from ADB. Okay, well, I will stop there and allow a few minutes for questions.
Thank you very much, Jeff. As usual, the insight on how the ADB been supporting the member country is great. And we do remember an early part of the pandemic, and the ADB also struggling to find the right mechanism to support the member country. I have a couple of questions. Among all the countries you mentioned, And now we have Andrew from Dhaka, Bangladesh. He's going to talk about how he's been working as a practitioner in the field. But I don't think he's going to say anything bad about ADB, right? But all of the member countries you mentioned, which country sort of stood up as a country has the most motivated, sort of innovative and a proactive approach to fight against COVID-19 with the limited resource they have? Do you have any country you feel very sort of, impressed with their performance in terms of the project management, borrowing the money, one thing from ADB, but executing it on time and phase by phase and producing and, projected outcome is different things. So would you say a few words, which country you see as sort of stood out, and if there is the country, and then what was the main factor you think that way?
Well, I mean, to be honest, and maybe Andrew with his health background, and say anything you like about ADB, but countries have approached it differently because they've had different challenges. For example, China identified the seriousness of it very early and reacted very strongly. Whilst some countries outside of the region were wondering what it was, China was actually doing stuff, and I think some of the but that's not possible in every country because you don't have that kind of centralized control. But I think, during the early stages of the pandemic, China did an excellent job. It has, there are undoubtedly challenges still ahead, as we see in the press, about a zero COVID strategy versus an acceptance. Another country that did well, but only because of the scale in terms of vaccine doses, but that was India. But that was because, in part, the largest vaccine manufacturer in the world is in India, the Serum Institute of India, who have the capacity to pump out the highest number of doses. Another country that did particularly well, in some ways, with the least resources, without the resources of China or the Philippines, China or India, I think is actually the Philippines. I mean, the Philippines has, quite a limited public health infrastructure, but it was quite draconian and severe in its lockdowns and restrictions on activity, because it knew that it didn't have the luxury and the resources if the pandemic really exploded. So all three approached it very, very differently. And all three, I think, can be commended for elements of what they did. I'm sure the public health authorities and politicians will reflect on what was done well and what could have been done better. But two big countries for different reasons managed it well. And then a country without anything like the resources of either of those two, equally, I think, managed it well.
Thank you very much.
There's been a mixture.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry. Jeff, go ahead. Yeah. Sorry, Jeff, I sort of stopped you in the middle of your the answering, so you can go ahead. Yeah.
No, I've finished.
Okay.
Finished.
Right. Okay, thank you very much. Your insight, how the ADB been supporting it, and then India, obviously China been doing pretty well. And so having said that, let's invite Andrew Smith from Dhaka and Bangladesh, and been working on behalf of the Bangladesh MOH, Minister of Health and the healthcare sector, see how he's been working with the policymaker and, development bank with AID. And would you welcome Andrew Smith? Andrew, come on.
Hi, Professor Kim. Hi, everyone. Very good to meet you all. Andrew here. My background briefly, and then I'll share some content. So healthcare operator background, been in digital healthcare for the last 12 years. founded what is the largest digital healthcare social enterprise in Bangladesh with Professor Yunus, Nobel Prize winner. And we've been doing a range of projects under the pandemic to tackle coronavirus. So what I'll share in the next 15 minutes or so are some of the projects that we've done to help Bangladesh through the crisis and through the very difficult last few years. And then I'll share some future work that is coming next, and all showing different ways that the procurement bodies, the funders and the government and healthcare deliverers can all work together on building back stronger. So first of all, who are Grameen Digital Health, the company that I co-founded? So largest digital and online offline healthcare provider in Bangladesh. We're a digital provider. We've got 6 million registered patients digitally. We've also got 100 plus clinics that are providing physical care services. We have a nursing college, a partnership with Glasgow Caledonian in Scotland, where I'm from. And we've got a range of eye hospitals. And coming very soon, we're going to have a full service general hospital that is currently under construction. So that's our organization. There's a little bit on the future. So the new hospital that is coming, $200 million investment from our company. It'll be open in 2024, kind of mid to late 2024. So that's kind of who we are. Some basic kind of stats. So to date, in the last year or two, we've done 1.6 million digital doctor consultations. We've given 100 million digital health tips on diabetes, safe pregnancy, safe birth. We do micro health insurance. We've got 4 million people with micro health insurance. And Professor Yunus, Nobel Prize winner for microcredit, he's our board chair and our owner. So very good focus on being a sustainable business. So make services that patients will like, but also social impact and changing the health of Bangladesh for the better. And then on the right, you can see a few innovations we've been launching. So placing video booths into pharmacies so that even patients that don't have a mobile phone can access digital doctor. We've done a diabetes management service for 40,000 patients in Bangladesh. And that's taken people from managing diabetes badly to managing diabetes very well. And then a range of COVID services that I'll share in just one kind of second. And you can see there on the screen how we showcase our services to patients. It's positioned as a digital hospital. So all the services of a hospital, from home medicine, home diagnostic, home specialists, from your pocket, from your mobile phone, so to you, your mother, your father, your child, via your mobile. So very simple kind of service. And then some big partnerships that we have. So SMC, Blue Star, are the largest pharmacy network in Bangladesh. They've been heavily funded by USAID over the last 20 years through a number of procurement contracts. They've got thousands and thousands of pharmacies across Bangladesh, and we're now bringing our digital doctor services to them. And then obviously we're partnering with our sister enterprise, Grameen Bank, who also have a couple of thousand branches across Bangladesh. So that was the kind of company introduction. What have we been doing under the pandemic with some of the partners like UKAID, USAID, and for the future kind of AIIB? So here are some of the projects, and these were all procurement initiatives that were run in 2020, 2021 to help Bangladesh deliver healthcare and reduce the negative impact on healthcare of coronavirus. So on the left-hand side, you can see a range of projects that we delivered with UKAID under what was DFID and is now part of other departments. So we did 200,000 people receiving kind of micro health insurance against coronavirus. So if they were hospitalized with coronavirus, they would receive a cash payout. We engaged 2.5 million people to do symptom checking so that they didn't go and take a COVID test unless they really needed one. We did a kind of e-learning platform, so a special app that was developed for Bangladesh's community health workers, and 50,000 frontline community health workers learned about tackling COVID via the app. And we did a COVID advice line for all of those health workers too, which 50,000 of them actually used. So a whole range of services, procured by UKAID, but given to the health service of Bangladesh. And then we adapted those services and did it with MetLife. So MetLife are the biggest health insurance provider in Bangladesh. commercially, and they then scaled many of those services to a further 1.1 million people. So a nice example of how the public procurement can deliver benefit to the bottom of the pyramid, and then many of those services were scaled commercially to another 1 million people afterwards. So other services that we delivered with UK Aid over the pandemic period. So we also took over the operation of the government of Bangladesh testing and vaccine hotline. So the national vaccination hotline for queries, for any adverse reactions that someone has had, for asking about where the vaccination points are to go and get vaccinated, and the testing hotline, so for vulnerable groups. So for the elderly, for the immunocompromised, how could they get access to testing? So the government's Institute for Epidemiology Control, they outsourced that to us with funding from UK Aid and US Aid. And we delivered 200,000 doctor consultations on vaccination and on testing under that contract. Very, very good public health impact, a great partnership for the last 18 months. There was another piece of procurement that was done about doing digital test and triage booths, where someone who has some symptoms of COVID and wants to have a video consultation with a doctor, and then if that consultation says it's necessary, they would have an instant kind of PCR test for COVID. So that was done in a number of locations in Bangladesh. We did 100,000 free COVID tests and another 250,000 doctor consultations through those online, offline booths, also funded in partnership by UK Aid. So a range of good projects to kind of help scale up the vaccination efforts, the testing efforts, and then the actual provision of medical advice to COVID sufferers. So another project that we've been delivering for the last 15 months, this one was a US Aid supported a piece of public health procurement. So this was about the RMG sector, so the ready-made garment sector in Bangladesh. I think maybe like Korea in the past, export earnings, huge focus for Bangladesh government. The garment sector is the leading export driver for the nation. It's been responsible for millions of jobs in the last 10 years. So how to reopen all the factories safely while giving great COVID care and COVID advice to the workers in the factories. That's what the project was. So here's a visual in Bangla. I apologize for the non-English. What we were providing to all of the garment workers was digital doctor advice, micro health insurance, and then specialized advice on maternal health and child health. So not just COVID services, but kind of rebuilding their health confidence with other advice. The scopes of the beneficiaries, it was 140,000 workers and their families in 25, 30 different garment factories, and then 10,000 further people in the neighboring slums where the factories are located. Core was more digital doctor booths, so a bit like the earlier booth that I showed on COVID testing. So we deployed this where there's a tablet, you could access the normal GP doctors, the maternal health specialist, the child health specialist, cardiologist, 20 other specialties, and also get help with diagnostic tests, medicines, and insurance. What we did in the last kind of 6 months, so there were 50,000 doctor video calls via those booths. There were 5,000 specialized consultations from maternal health experts, child health experts, and then 5,000 insurance claims. So people claiming for the cost of a COVID test, people claiming for hospitalization from COVID, and people claiming for just giving birth to their child. So quite a comprehensive piece of micro-insurance. We also introduced some other innovations for the factory workers. So in integrated kind of e-prescriptions and e-delivery. So if their video call with a doctor led to prescribed medicines, they could then, through the booth, place the order for the medicines. It was also funded by US Aid, and that would then arrive to the factory within 24 hours. So no need to go to a local pharmacy and pay a high price. If it was medically necessary, they could receive that medicine in a kind of closed loop through the digital doctor service, all funded by US Aid. So those were some of the COVID projects to both help Bangladesh deal with COVID, to help the garment sector kind of recover its production, keep people healthy and well. And then this final project has not yet commenced. This is an exciting piece of work that the city mayor of Dhaka North, of the north of the capital of Bangladesh, has been working with me and the team for the last 12 months on. And it will be quite a comprehensive kind of building back better as per today's theme. So it will upgrade 43 kind of health centres, clinics across the capital city to be digital health centres. So 20 specialties, cardiology, gynecology, all available from every one of those clinics. There'll be a new digital, smart, specialised hospital. So it will convert what is currently a COVID facility that has isolation and COVID treatment, but no other services. It will convert that hospital into a full service hospital with 12 or 13 departments and a whole range of interesting IoT technology from China and beyond. There'll be a mass screening program for 3 million citizens with some integrated kind of AI and machine learning so that we can detect 12 or 13 different conditions from the population. And it will also help with some of the comorbidities and some of the symptoms and problems of long COVID that have been introduced. So this really is, building back better mega project. Some of the ambitions that the Mayor of Dhaka North has for this. So not just to upgrade all the infrastructure digitally, but how can we really detect diabetes and heart disease earlier? How can we increase the use of some of the ANC, PNC services that are already being funded, I'm sure, by ADB and others in the locality? How can we decrease the number of high-risk pregnancies, decrease the number of lost babies? How can we cover a higher proportion of health costs so that less health costs are paid out of pocket by patients? And how can we reduce misdiagnosis, reduce overtreatment, a lot of the things that are common in the private sector kind of today in Dhaka, in kind of Bangladesh. And then also, how can we reduce the prevalence of some of the other diseases that are big population health impacts like dengue, as well as some of those, COVID, long COVID impacts. And finally, the whole project will be more climate resilient healthcare across all of Dhaka North. And we're very much hoping this will be funded from AIIB as part of their health infrastructure kind of program. So there's a little flavour in 10 minutes of the work that we've been doing with a range of partners, funders, and the government of Bangladesh, and a snapshot of what is coming next. So thank you, Professor Kim, for allowing me to share.
Thank you very much, Andrew. And while I'm listening to your presentation, I think we have a common question on behalf of Korean audience. So everything what you offer and what you mentioned was all digital platform. We have maybe just a perception about the Bangladesh being a sort of a underdeveloped sort of environment for infrastructure for IT industry. Could you say a few words about all of these services, telemedicine, all of these things what you're offering? Do they have enough IT infrastructure to support your services?
Yeah, so I've been in Bangladesh for almost 5 years now. So what I'd say is at the level of consumers, so there's now, of the population of 170 million, there's about 95 million who are already internet users. They've got a smartphone or a feature phone. They're using Facebook, they're using YouTube, they're using other digital services. So at the level of consumers, it's not quite the same level as Korea or China or other countries, but there's been a much more mass adoption of digital communication and digital services in the last 3 or 4 years. And the infrastructure, your question on 3G and 4G, very huge rollout in the last 4 or 5 years by the mobile networks. So I used to work for Telenor, who own Grameenphone, the #1 mobile network in Bangladesh. They've been investing, tens of millions of dollars in rolling out 3G and 4G, and so have the other kind of providers. So pretty good infrastructure. But what I'd say though is in the government system, so it's much more uneven. So parts of the public sector have, very good infrastructure where there's been funding from ADB or AIB or World Bank or others. But other parts of the public sector much more far behind and need an upgrade. So yeah, so good consumer adoption, but a bit more uneven in the public sector.
Thank you very much. Well, on behalf of the Public Procurement Service of Korea, and especially and all the audience, we have it, and my apology, we were not able to entertain your question, but the UNDP, Dr. Hansen, Mr. Taylor from ADV, and Andrew Smith from the Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, gave us very good insight how the public procurement and contributing and attributing to recover and the post-corona pandemic. Having said that, and thank you again, all our main speaker and everybody attended today, and our audience. Thank you again for the PPS. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day and be healthy. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you, session chair, and all the panelists for excellent moderation, presentations, and in-depth discussion. All right, now it's time to take a break. So we will reconvene at 4:10 p.m. in Seoul local time. I will see you back. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. 감사합니다.
잘 들리십니까? 잘 들리-
안녕하십니까?
예, 안녕하세요. 예, 안녕하세요.
네, 안녕하십니까?
All right, we will start the second session now. For those who join through the Zoom platform, if you use wired or wireless earphones, you can conveniently watch the workshop. On top of that, we are providing simultaneous interpretation services. By clicking the interpretation button in the bottom of the Zoom screen, you can choose between Korean and English. The second session has a Korean-speaking panelist, so you may readily use the interpretation function. Well, this session covers data-driven innovation in public procurement. To moderate our panel on this topic is Professor Seung-woo Son, President of Korea Institute of Intellectual Property. Without further ado, I'd like to turn the floor over to Professor Seung-woo Son.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to the second session of the International Public Procurement Workshop. My name is Seung-woo Son, the president of the Korean Institute of Intellectual Property, also professor of the Jung University in Korea. In the past, I participated in revision of the International Procurement Model Law as Korean delegation to the United Nations Commission on the International Trade Law. I also participated in e-procurement system consulting projects in Rwanda and Iraq and Cameroon and so on. So I'd like to extend my sincere gratitude to our distinguished guests participating in this workshop. And many of the guests are joining online from the several countries. I also especially grateful to the three speakers for these sessions. The theme of this session is data-driven innovation in public procurement. In digital transformation, artificial intelligence is the engine, and data is the all of the economy. So data is the heart of the fourth industrial revolution. So innovation using data is also taking place in public procurement field. Using data can increase the efficiency and transparency of the procurement planning and biddings and public demand and the expenditure, and improve the convenience of suppliers and the procurement agencies in the procurement process and the administrations. So these sessions take a closer look at the key strategy and tools for achieving data-driven digital transformations in procurement. So now let's start the presentation. So we will start with three presentations and followed by discussion and Q&A. So let me introduce you the first speaker, Ms. Nanda Xiaoming. Ms. Xiaoming is the Senior Program Manager for Asia in OCP. She is based on Indonesia, and she is an advocate for freedom of information, inclusive and good governance, and she has a multidisciplinary background on transparency, anti-corruption, local governance, and urban development. So Ms. Xiaoming is currently online. She will be presenting in real times. So Ms. Xiaoming, hello.
Hello, Professor. Good afternoon.
How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Okay. Presentation will be about 20 minutes. So, ladies and gentlemen, please give a big hand to the speaker.
All right. Thank you, everyone. So I will share my screen. All right, so allow me to start by saying good afternoon, everyone. I am Nanda Sihombing from the Open Contracting Partnership. Today, I'm going to share about what is Open Contracting Data Standard and how it can be used for data-driven innovation in public procurement with several examples from around the world. I'm going to share also a specific example from Indonesia. So why is public procurement so important? First of all, we all know, like what Gavin said in the opening speech, that there is a huge amount of money in public procurement. Every year, governments spend about $13 trillion on contracts on everything from pencils and paper, lunch proctoring meetings, to building major infrastructure projects such as bridges or highways. 1/3 of every dollar spent by government is on government contracting. And this is equivalent to 15% of global GDP. But procurement is unfortunately government's number one corruption risk. 57% of OECD foreign bribery cases involve bribes for public contracts. 30% companies says corruption prevented them from winning contracts in the European Union. COVID has exacerbated these challenges. Crisis situations are ripe for corruption due to soaring funding levels, like government spent over 100 billion on COVID-19 contracts in the first 4 months of the pandemic alone. There is also reduced financial controls and frequently changing or flood of new actors. Low levels of transparency, digitization, and coordination have created a Hunger Games scenario as hospitals, public health agencies, and national and local governments scramble to compete to purchase essential equipment, medicine, and services. But it is not always corruption. It can just as often be incompetence. This is an example of what can happen when project planning or coordination breaks down. This is a public project in a Lithuanian school. Obvious problem we can see here is that there are no stalls or cubicles, and this is actually meant to be a girls' changing room. And if this happens in normal times, what can we expect in times of crisis? Here's another example of a bike lane from a small island in Jakarta, Indonesia. You can see here that the steps here were not meant for bicycles, and this is also more of a pavement as it is too short. So bike lane is a big necessity in Jakarta city, but would probably not the most obvious need for a small island. Better planning and monitoring would solve this problem. This is where open contracting can help, and here's how it plays out in practice. But before we start, so what is open contracting? Or open contracting partnership? We work with government, businesses, civil society to transform public procurement to deliver better goods, services, and works for everyone. Using the power of open data and effective participatory mechanism, we help to reduce corruption, improve efficiency, enhance competition, build credibility and trust, and deliver better value for money. At the core of our work, we work with data standards, which help stakeholders publish and use standardized, structured, machine-readable open data in a timely manner, so that it is easier to understand what works and what doesn't, and from there, introduce reform. What is a data standard and why is it important? A data standard sets out how to format data so that it is standardized and machine-readable. Let's take a look at this example. Is this 3rd of July or is this 7th of March? In Indonesia, it would be 3rd of July. In the US, it would be 7th of March. How many different ways are there of writing the date? How would an analyst or computer program work with dates in different formats? A data resolves ambiguity. A data standard resolves ambiguity and helps different systems work out how to interpret information. So you can make sense of the data and you can compare like for like. It makes the data interoperable. But now with digital information, we can connect data information, one unique identifier that connects the whole cycle of public procurement. That's what OCDS does. Why do we need data standards? So what is OC for IDS? So open contracting for infrastructure data standard provide an approach for regular disclosure of structured, standardized data on infrastructure projects and contracts. And how does this schema work in practice? It describes data at 3 levels. The project level, which moves through identification, preparation, implementation, and completion phase, with important items to disclose at each point. The contracting summary level, which captures key information about the contracts, the delivered design, construction, and supervision. It is important to note that each use case has different data needs, and therefore different types of data and documents should be considered for publication. That being said, not every publisher should aim to publish everything, as the standard is permissive with only a few required fields, and we encourage partners to publish information in accordance with the objectives of their reforms. In many cases, publication is iterative, with more information added as it becomes feasible, both legally and technically. What does this mean in reality? It means that you can go from this is Ukraine, which is at the forefront of our mind right now, under Soviet procurement system. This data was in the form of rooms filled with files and paper. And then the Maidan Revolution happened, and civil society, businesses, and the new government collaborated on open contracting. It was a new model of radical openness. And since then, they have a new system called Prozoro. This is what they look like: a world-class transparent procurement system. In the first year alone, they have savings over $1 billion, and then there is an increase of over 1,000 of new suppliers. Their corruption perception index half. They've also embedded civil society monitoring with 50% fixed rate so far. Even now, at this sad situation that is happening in the Ukraine, they are still carrying out their procurement in a transparent manner. Another example, using data standard, it means you can join up with other data sets to maximize utility. For example, this is Malaysia Buildcaster, a prototype that helps the government identify the optimal locations for schools and hospitals so that the citizens who need this the most actually benefit. The team joined up planning and procurement data with capacity and needs-based data to pinpoint areas in critical need of new health and educational infrastructure. It also means you can join up different data sets and different systems so that central governments can more effectively monitor local government. This is what could potentially happen. It can also allow civil society to monitor easily how government is performing, and at the same time, the businesses can also more efficiently identify the upcoming opportunities and new tenders. In Paraguay, we work with our partners to ensure accurate identification and publication of COVID-19 emergency procurement within 10 days of purchase. This means there were almost real-time, up-to-date reference prices on all COVID emergency procurement items. Journalists have since identified irregular procurements which were reported extensively in the media. For example, a case where a state-owned enterprise purchased large volumes of tonic water at 5 times the market price, allegedly because it could protect against the virus. As a result of this investigative journalism, the DNCP, the National Procurement Agency, has introduced new rules for reference prices on emergency purchases to be published. This open contracting approach is also enabling more agile procurement. For example, the NCP, the National Public Procurement Agency, they have created a registry of suppliers of emergency items to make it easier for agency to act or to respond. This is another example from Taiwan, an analysis where public procurement data is joined up with flood data to help the government identify areas in greatest need of flood defense infrastructure. You can see from the slide that there were already some discrepancy in past procurement, where some areas with few floods received significant spending and others with lots of flood had much less spending. And in India, we are going even further by adding socioeconomic indicators to analyze this. Our partner, Civic Data Lab, will talk in details about this in tomorrow's session, so please join them if you have the time. Similarly, in Honduras, the Infras tool, which was developed as part of the the Presidential Hackathon of Taiwan in 2019, they joined up infrastructure planning and procurement data with environmental licensing data to help government planners assess if proposed infrastructure projects have secured the correct environmental licenses before projects are even approved. So in the concept phase, Infras showed that approved infrastructure projects and corresponding environmental licenses, there's a lack thereof. And there's also discrepancies between approved projects and environmental regulatory requirements. They also show the approved projects without environmental impact assessments or failures to disclose the EIA. So as you can see, data and data analytics can help improve decision-making and drive positive change in multiple different ways. We work with impacts on our mind. One of the examples that I personally like is this one's from Colombia, where they include the open contracting and open contracting data standards in 2 of their open government partnership national action plans, starting in 2015 to 2019. So in Colombia at the time, the government wanted to improve the procurement of school meals in Bogota. It was common knowledge that the procurement of school meals was inefficient and prices were inflated. Suppliers were colluding to fix prices and keep prices high. For example, chicken drumsticks were being charged at up to $20 per drumstick, which was 4 or 5 times higher than in markets. Plus, many school meals were not delivered to schools even though they had been paid for. So children were going hungry. One of the reasons supplier could do this was because the way the school meals were tendered prevented many suppliers from participating, as they were required to provide the food and at the same time also to distribute and deliver it to the school. Smaller suppliers did not have the capacity to do both. The open contracting approach enabled the procurement process to be reformed so that the contracts could be unbundled so that more suppliers could participate. As a result, supplier diversity increased by over 350%, going from 12 suppliers to 55 suppliers. And at the same time, the quality of the food has increased with a cheaper price at that. And now 800,000 school meals are delivered every day. I'm going to give another example, another story from Indonesia. And to give you a brief context, Indonesia is sitting at the top 8 globally for countries who spend the most on public contracts. That is not without reason. With a population of 260 million and counting, Indonesia is a decentralized country. This translates into multiple levels of government agencies, as you can see here. This number changes over time. Some years it's added, some years it reduced, have something to do with government agencies appear and dissolve. That makes LKPP, the Indonesian Public Procurement Agency, oversees over 600 e-procurement systems spread across 17,000 islands in the country, which means there has always been and will probably always be gap between the capital and big islands with the small remote islands. From procurement perspective, this means National Public Procurement Agency cannot make everyone comply to a new system. Just because Jakarta, which is our capital city, says so, doesn't mean the city or regency in small islands will do so. There is budget implication that comes with compliance. All of the procurement processes in Indonesia captures in an e-procurement system. As you can see, there are multiple platforms, not integrated, not even standardized system or data in any way for each of the procurement stage. And these are the ones that are public. They're still building some more new platforms and some other platforms that are not captured in this slide, like the electronic catalog, for example. The ones that are accessible by public are only from planning to award stage of the procurement processes. But nowhere in those platforms the data is available for download. You have to copy, paste, and enter the number manually if you want to do the analysis, which what ICW, Indonesia Corruption Watch, our partner, did in the start of their journey back in 2013. This has changed though. Late last year, the procurement agency has published these first 3 datasets publicly. What's wonderful is that the Public Procurement Agency realized they need allies to help monitor public procurement processes. They can't do it alone. So they make an agreement with civil society organization, ICW, to help them monitor public procurement projects. They share the data sets so the civil society can help build the red flag tools. Monitoring is also part of the responsibility of the National Public Procurement Agency. So this collaboration, in a way, also helps them in carrying out their responsibility. Last year, ICW then applied our open contracting red flags methodology to their red flags tool and come up with 7 indicators for these red flags based on the available existing data that are shared with them, from tender duration to who is the repeat winners. This is what our red flag guide looks like. It covers the contracting phase, the associated corruption scheme, the red flag related to that scheme, a description of the indicator or the context, and includes the OCDS fields needed to calculate it. Not only the red flag analysis, ICW also expanded the tool to map out other indicators linked to OCDS, something that shows information like this. It shows information from monthly procurement spending, new supplier participations to proportion to cancel tenders. They built 3 dashboards to show all infrastructure on the left side, COVID-19 related tenders in the middle, and then as well as national and subnational procurement, which are based on OCDS use case indicators. This is the use case guide that we've developed with our partners around the world, and the one that ICW used for their previous for their dashboard development shown in the previous slide. So, as we believe transparency is a means to an end and not an end in itself, Why does it matter? It matters because for civil society, we love to hear it. That will be all from me. And before I close my presentation, I'd like to inform you that we also have pre-help desk that can help you scope how OCDS can help support your goals, deliver online trainings and workshops on open contracting and OCDS, or answer all of your open contracting or OCDS related questions. I'm Nanda Sihombing from the Open Contracting Partnership. Thank you. Over to you, Professor.
Thank you very much, Ms. Xiaoming. It's very insightful presentation. Especially thanks for for sharing what OSP has done in in many countries, and you also share introduced Indonesia's experience and policy related to data analysis and uses. Thank you. The AI technology is developing rapidly these days, so high qualified the data can enhance the reliability of the suppliers and can be used in procurement related policy. So we will talk and the Q&A. We will have a Q&A later. So now let us welcome the second speakers, Mr. Honu Lee. Mr. Lee is a senior advisor of International Trade Center in Geneva. And prior to joining the ITC, he had extensive experience in public constructions management and the electronic procurement at the PPS in Korea. So he has also online. Mr. Lee, good morning.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes. Are you in
Yeah,
Geneva?
thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The title of your presentation today is Public Procurement Market Intelligence in Digitization Era for Encouraging SME Export. So when you are ready to present, you can start. So please welcome Mr. Lee.
Okay. Thanks for having me. I'm going to share my screen. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Okay, again. Hello, everybody. Good morning and good afternoon. It's my pleasure to meet you and have an opportunity to present ITC's works in respect of public procurement. My name is Henry, and I'm currently working for ITC in Geneva. The role of the division I'm working in is to develop and operate a series of tools providing trade market intelligence to policymakers and small and medium-sized enterprises, especially in the least developed and developing countries. The title for today is Public Procurement Market Intelligence in the Digitization Era, especially for encouraging SMEs export. And what I'm going to talk about is how public procurement data can facilitate SMEs participation in the international public procurement market. Okay. I'm going to start with the introduction. First, I'll let you know a little bit about ITC and its market analysis tools. ITC is a multilateral agency with a joint mandate with the WTO and the UN, established in 1964. I'd say ITC is a focal point for trade-related technical assistance. We pursue building trade-led growth for a more equitable world. ITC believes that its support for SMEs' ability to compete can lift individual communities and countries out of poverty. Using the powerful engine of trade, ITC is pursuing goals such as sustainable development, diversity and value enhancement, youth employment, and women's economic growth. There are areas that ITC focuses on. First, sustainable value chains. ITC makes efforts for SMEs to join in sustainable and resilient value chains through alliances and the Trade for Sustainable Development Initiative. And inclusive trades. is represented by the Sheet Trade Initiative and Green Trade. And then e-commerce. ITC helps entrepreneurs in developing countries to start their own e-commerce services technically. For regional integration, as a key example, ITC provides African trade observatories to support implementing commitments of African continent free trade area. Without any limitation, global users, in many cases anonymous users, can freely access ITC's data-driven analysis tools for their informed decision. For example, which countries to target with their exports, which sectors to diversify into, and then how they adapt their products, service, and operations to meet market demands, and which strategies to adopt to attract investment in promising sectors. ITC provides these informative tools by embedding the latest market information from diverse sources. Since the advent of TradeMap, the first tool developed in 2002, new services have been continuously added. Market access map, export potential map, standard map, procurement map, market price information, and investments information, and global trade help desk, as well as regional integration tools like the Euromed Trade Help Desk. Sheet Trade Initiative is where you can find ITC's intervention in the field of public procurement first. To support women's proactive participation in public procurement, ITC works together with many policymakers to set up more favorable circumstances for women-owned enterprises. The presence of women-owned enterprises in public procurement contracts would contribute to economic growth and hiring more women. As you might know, it's an emerging role of public procurement to get more socio-economic effects through its public spending power. Second, ITC is operating the procurement map, which provides information about public tenders around the world and bid results as well. Procurement map lets users have a glimpse of public procurement related laws and regulations, which is favorable to SMEs and women-owned enterprises. ITC also aimed at getting SMEs access to international public procurement market information free of charge. Lastly, with participating in projects like the Korean Knowledge Sharing Program, ITC has some role in advising SMEs in order to support their trials to step into public procurement markets. From this page, I'm going to talk about more specific ideas related to public procurement and promising data-driven intelligence. First, I'd like to let you know a little bit more about Procurement Map and how and what it offers. Procurement Map provides users with information in detail on tender announcements around the world. It is the main feature of Procurement Map, and users can make use of bid results as well. A map image with a summarized number of tenders and awards in a certain country would be useful when users want to have a quick look. Users can search for tender announcements and bid results by country names and product sector names or codes according to such classification system like harmonized commodities and common procurement vocabulary. Within the public tenders, users can access more detailed information by clicking components aligned and showing some headlines like the title of the tender, buyer's name, price, and bidding categories. If users want to look up in a more structured way, for example, a user want to find out of all the relevant tenders, including a broad range of products, close to what his or her company manufactures. The user can use the advanced search function. Through this function, users can see a hierarchical tree of products list tenders and awards are containing their HS and CPB codes. Those classification codes have been converted from their original ones to HS CPB when derived from e-procurement systems. Here's what you can check out if you look up bid lizards. I chose these lizards from a country query with Switzerland, and what I can check out from the information I received is that an Indian company's bid has succeeded in the competition, and it eventually became the contracting party. Next, you can see a brief explanation of the procurement policy to SMEs in Switzerland and the contents and the scope and thresholds of open tenders based on regional trade agreement. From a different perspective of SMEs, those who especially are eager to export their product and who are willing to participate in the international public procurement market, the data set facilitating the current procurement map might be insufficient. The main objective of ITC with procurement map is to help SMEs to get into the international trade market. Procurement map has succeeded to have its first mission accomplished. Of course, it's worth it because now SMEs in the least developed and developing countries can easily and freely access international tender information. However, it's probably just a decent start to a complex and difficult assignment. Entering the international procurement market is definitely not somewhat can be achieved solely through market information. Special reports are necessarily put in place for SMEs to engage with purchasing entities. As you know, such supporting networking activities and competency building activities are required. There are hundreds of hurdles and setbacks to overcome, including customs duties, tariffs, and labeling requirements that are basically accompanied to public procurement market penetration. This is an area where ITC can create efficiency and synergies with our trade analysis tools. On the other hand, it is necessary to understand the practical difficulties of entering the international procurement market, and companies should pursue an appropriate mode of penetration depending on the market and sectors. It's also much difficult to directly enter the overseas procurement market, meaning getting into direct contract with a foreign organization. SMEs might make contact with trade agencies to resolve trade-related troubles, and also they are likely to have some good partners who are supplying in the international market, might be aware of a lack of knowledge regarding international trade. It may be a prerequisite condition of whether companies decide to step into the public procurement market. From import tariff, shipment and relevant documentation to product requirements, like labeling a bundle of export conditions for their product should be clearly addressed before the decision. Fortunately, there are a huge amount of freely accessible trade information provided by many international organizations like ITC. Now, the thing that we have to take care of is how well both public procurement and trade information could be efficiently combined with each other in order to make synergies so for SMEs to make penetration of a public procurement market. How hard is making penetration of the international public procurement market? No solid statistics about public procurement market penetration exist. When it comes to indirect penetration, where we should put in penetration modes like commercial presence and value added on the table. Nonetheless, a few methodologies have been invented and suggested by researchers. For example, the TIBA indicators of OECD help make sense of value-added trade for 45 unique industrial sectors in 66 economies. According to a report about the EU public procurement market, in terms of the number of awards, only 1.15% of public procurement above the GPA threshold in 2017 was made through direct contract with foreign companies. It sounds like a common through the eye of a needle. In the same study, the researcher claimed that the rate significantly increases to 12.5% if the local presence and the indirect entry through value-added participation are considered in the calculation. According to another recent report, analyzed awards between 2016 and 19 from TED, in terms of the number of awards in the EU public procurement market, the sum of all penetration modes comprises 25% of all awards valued between 1,000 to 200 million euros. Although the direct penetration was only 2.4%, local presence and value-added modes are alike. These rates are obviously more comfortable to listen to. This type of analysis trying to show actual penetration in the public procurement market will help SMEs make an informed decision. And more importantly, plenty of data from different fields like international trade, public procurement, and companies make those analyses possible. The next imminent obstacle might be coming from company information. It's who's question. SMEs should choose just the right local business. Fundamentally, even some of developed countries that are frontier in public procurement data often neglect to collect and open supplier information. SMEs should be able to use the information of the kind of company data from country that may provide detailed information on the successful bidder and other information such as private or non-profit organizations that professionally provide company information. Okay. There are few successful stories in data-driven public procurement intelligence for specific objectives. And I hope ITC will play a role in helping SMEs export their product to the international public procurement market through data-driven intelligence over both international trade and public procurement. Thank you for your time and attention. If you have any questions about my presentation or ITS's work in public procurement, you can use this time, and you can also use this email address. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Lee, for your wonderful presentation. Many people are also online, so if you have any questions or comments, and please leave a text message in the chatting rooms. So we will introduce your comments and questions in the Q&A time. So now we move on to the last speaker, Mr. Geun-ho Gong. And Mr. Gong has served as a Deputy Director of the E-Procurement Planning Division at Korea PPS since 2021. He has been in charge of the collection or management of procurement statistics, analysis of big data on CONAPS. So the topic of his presentation today is PPS Korea's experience on data life cycle management. So please welcome Mr. Gong.
네, 안녕하십니까. 조달청 전자조달기획과 공근호 사무관입니다. 이번 시간에는 조달청에서 운영하고 있는 데이터 개방 그리고 활용 시스템과 데이터 활용 사례들을 간단하게 소개드리고 공공조달 데이터의 라이프 사이클 관리 전략을 발표하겠습니다. 네, 웹 3.0 시대에 디지털 대전환 시대가 다가오고 있습니다. 비로소 데이터가 경쟁력인 세상이 되었습니다. 4차 산업혁명 시대가 도래함에 따라 정보통신 기술의 중요성이 4차 산업혁명 시대가 도래함에 따라 정보통신 기술의 중요성이 부각되고 있고 코로나19 이후 공공과 민간 가릴 것 없이 디지털 전환이 가속화되고 있습니다. 향후 양질의 빅데이터 확보와 적절한 활용이 공공 서비스 디지털 전환의 핵심 요소로 작용할 것으로 전망되고 있습니다. 한편 정책 수단으로서 공공 조달의 역할이 강조되고 있으며 데이터에 기반한 과학적인 조달 행정이 필수가 되었습니다. 재정 확대에 따라 혁신 성장 그리고 공정 경제의 중요 정책 수단으로 공공 조달이 주목받고 있고 그 시장 규모도 매년 증가하고 있습니다. 공공 조달 입찰 플랫폼인 나라장터의 거래 규모는 2017년 87.7조 원에서 2021년 120조 원으로 증가하였으며 같은 기간 입찰에 1회 이상 참가한 기업도 15.4만 개사에서 18.2만 개사로 대폭 증가하였습니다. 전 세계적인 이슈인 ESG 실현 그리고 탄소 중립 등에 효과적으로 대응하기 위해서는 데이터 확충 그리고 데이터의 활용 다변화 등을 통해 전략적 조달이 필요한 상황입니다. 조달청은 디지털 전환 시대의 데이터 기반 과학적 조달 행정 실현을 위해 데이터의 생산 수집부터 저장 관리 그리고 개방 활용까지 전 범위를 아우르는 데이터 라이프 사이클 관리 전략을 수립하였습니다. 먼저 조달 데이터의 제공 현황을 먼저 말씀드리겠습니다. 현재 조달청은 통계 시스템 2개, 그리고 데이터 개방 시스템 1개, 빅데이터 분석 시스템 1개 등 총 4개의 데이터 개방 활용 시스템을 운영하고 있습니다. 이번 시간에는 조달청 내부 통계 시스템 1개를 제외하고 외부 사용자 대상으로 운영하고 있는 나머지 3개의 시스템에 대해서 간단하게 설명드리겠습니다. 먼저 온통 조달입니다. 온통 조달은 공공 조달 통계 시스템입니다. 정책 결정에 공공 조달 통계를 효율적으로 활용하기 위해서 2015년 구축되었습니다. 현재 제공하고 있는 통계는 주로 계약 정보를 취합한 통계로 총 73종에 달하는 통계를 제공하고 있습니다. 나라장터를 포함하여 공공 분야 전체의 계약 정보를 수집하여 통계 형태로 제공하고 있습니다. 다음 조달 정보 개방 포털입니다. 조달 데이터의 적극적인 개방을 통한 민간 신규 비즈니스 창출을 위해 2017년 구축되었습니다. 현재는 입찰, 낙찰, 그리고 계약 관련 파일 데이터 81종, 오픈 API 18종을 개방하고 있습니다. 나라장터 및 일부 자체적으로 운영되고 있는 조달 시스템의 정보를 수집하여 원천 데이터 형태로 제공하고 있습니다. 마지막으로 빅데이터 시스템입니다. 조달 업무 주체의 데이터 기반 의사결정을 지원하기 위해 2018년 구축되었습니다. 나라장터에서 수집된 입찰, 낙찰, 계약 정보를 분석, 시각화하여 제공하고 있으며 분석 보고서, 분석 서비스, 통합해서 57종의 서비스를 제공하고 있습니다. 제가 말로만 설명드리면 어떤 시스템인지 이해하기 어려울 것 같아서 각 시스템의 메인 화면을 한번 보여드리겠습니다. 이것이 공공조달 통계 시스템인 온통조달 메인 화면입니다. 가운데에 위치한 이제 대시보드에서 공공조달 전체 규모와 함께 기관별 조달 실적, 그리고 기업별 조달 실적, 계약 방법별 조달 실적, 조달 목적물별 조달 실적 등 계약 실적을 간단하게 확인할 수 있습니다. 그리고 좌측에는 공공조달 통계를 조회할 수 있습니다. 이제 통계 리스트들이 있는데요. 아까 대시보드에 표시하고 있는 전체 공공조달 계약 통계와 함께 기관 구분별, 그리고 기업 구분별, 조달 목적물별, 계약 방법별, 지역별 상세 통계를 조회할 수 있습니다. 그리고 대시보드의 우측에 이제 주요 관심 통계가 나와 있는데요. 한국에서는 사회적 기업이나 장애인 기업, 여성 기업과 같은 사회적 약자 기업이나 녹색 제품 등에 대해서 일정한 비율을 우선적으로 구매를 하거나 의무적으로 구매하는 제도를 운영하고 있습니다. 해당 기업이나 제품의 계약 실적을 한눈에 확인 가능하도록 표시하고 있습니다. 네, 다음 조달 정보 개방 포털의 메인 화면입니다. 가운데 검색창에서 파일 데이터나 오픈 API를 검색할 수 있는 검색창이 있고요. 물품 공사 용역 외자 등 유형별로 조회할 수 있고 조달청이 운영 중인 종합 쇼핑몰에 대해서도 별도로 조회할 수 있습니다. 그리고 조달 단계별로 발주 계획부터 조달 요청, 사전 규격, 입찰, 계약, 납품 요구까지 이렇게 단계별로도 조회가 가능합니다. 주요 제공 데이터로는 공사, 물품 용역 등 유형별 계약 내역, 그리고 구성업체 내역, 발주 계획 내역, 사전 규격 내역 등이 있습니다. 다음 빅데이터 시스템입니다. 앞서와 마찬가지로 빅데이터 분석 보고서를 검색할 수 있는 검색창이 있고요. 사용자 유형별 관심 분야 분석 그리고 빅데이터 기술 활용 분석 등을 조회할 수 있습니다. 먼저 사용자 유형별 관심 분야 분석 같은 경우에는 조달 업체나 수요기관과 같은 사용자 유형에 따라 관심 분야 분석 보고서 조회가 가능합니다. 기관별, 계약 방법별, 조달 방식별, 지역별로 나라 장터의 공고 현황이나 계약 현황 등을 시각화한 분석 보고서를 확인할 수 있고요. 빅데이터 기술 활용 분석과 같은 경우에는 이제 수요 기관이 공고 시 활용할 수 있도록 이전에 다른 기관에서 유사한 사업을 발주했을 때 제안 요청서가 어떻게 나갔는지 검색할 수 있는 서비스를 제공하고 있습니다. 그리고 조달청에서 운영 중인 종합 쇼핑몰의 검색 키워드 분석 서비스를 제공하고 있는데 여기에서는 특정 기간 많이 검색된 내용이 무엇이 있는지 확인하실 수 있습니다. 다음으로 저희가 최근에 진행했던 데이터 시각화 사례와 빅데이터 분석 사례를 말씀드리겠습니다. 먼저 지역별 수요기관과 조달기업의 나라장터 이용 현황입니다. 저희는 이거 태블로라는 소프트웨어를 사용해서 시각화했습니다. PC뿐만 아니라 태블릿이나 핸드폰을 통해서도 원활하게 사용할 수 있도록 반응형 웹으로 구현했습니다. 이것 같은 경우에는 이용자들이 지역별 기관이나 업체의 계약 실적을 비롯해 나라장터 등록 업체 현황 비교 그리고 연도별 계약 추이 파악 등을 보다 쉽게 확인할 수 있도록 지도와 그래프로 구현했습니다. 지도에서 좌측에 나와 있는 지도에서 확인하고 싶은 지역을 클릭하시면 지역별 상세 내용을 확인할 수 있습니다. 두 번째 사례입니다. 물품 분류별 조달 시장 규모입니다. 나라장터에는 다양한 물품들이 등록이 되어 있는데요. 그중에 이제 최근에 계약 실적이 존재했던 최근 5년간 계약 실적이 존재했던 15,245개의 물품에 대해서 해당 물품에 대한 간단한 설명과 함께 업체 구분별로 나라장터 등록 업체 수가 몇 개인지, 전국 그리고 지역별로 계약 실적이 어느 정도인지, 계약 금액 그리고 상위 업체가 어떤 업체인지 등에 대한 현황을 일괄적으로 제공하고 있습니다. 이건 역시 이용자가 직관적으로 편리하게 이용할 수 있도록 주요 데이터를 그래프, 지도로 시각화하였고 반응형 웹으로 구현했습니다. 해당 서비스로 물품별로 블루오션 그리고 레드오션의 사전 확인이 가능해져서 조달 업체의 사업 전략 수립에 도움이 된다는 평가를 받고 있습니다. 그 외에 빅데이터를 활용한 정책 효과 분석 사례로는 우수 제품 제도의 정책 효과 분석이 있었습니다. 성능, 기술, 품질이 뛰어난 물품을 우수 제품으로 지정하여 수의 계약 등 혜택을 주는 우수 제품 제도와 관련하여 우수 제품 획득 기업의 자산, 매출액, 영업이익, 고용률의 변화를 통해 정책 효과를 도출하였습니다. 그리고 AI 모델 구현을 위한 파일럿 분석도 진행을 했는데요. 공고 담당자가 입찰 경쟁성을 사전에 파악할 수 있도록 공고 시점에 해당 공고의 투찰 업체 수를 사전 예측하는 AI 모델 구현을 위한 파일럿 분석을 진행했습니다. 다음으로 물품 등록 업체의 편의 향상을 위해서 업체가 보유한 이미지 등록 시 세부 품명 번호를 추천해주는 모델 개발도 파일럿 진행한 바 있습니다. 데이터 제공 현황 그리고 시스템 현황과 사례 소개는 이것으로 마치고 조달 데이터 라이프 사이클 관리 전략에 대해서 말씀드리겠습니다. 먼저 조달청은 앞으로 수요자 중심 고부가 가치 데이터를 생산 수집할 예정입니다. 현재 조달 업무를 위한 입찰 계약 서류 상당수가 임세물이나 PDF와 같은 비정형 데이터로 관리되어서 계약 담당자의 수기 확인이 필요하고 데이터의 분석이나 활용에도 애로가 있습니다. 이를 해결하기 위해 기업이나 상품, 가격과 같은 입찰 시 활용할 수 있는 조달 데이터를 보유한 기관과 전산 연계를 통해 데이터를 즉각 활용할 수 있도록 데이터 확보를 추진하고, 이와 함께 OCR 툴을 활용하거나 데이터 항목 확대 등을 통해 비정형 데이터를 정형화하여 관리함으로써 데이터의 다양한 활용 기반을 구축할 계획입니다. 다음으로 조달 데이터의 개방이나 분석 수요는 항상 조달 데이터 사용자인 일반 국민 대상으로 일회성 공모전이나 경진대회 그리고 수요조사를 통해서 발굴을 했었는데, 앞으로는 그와 함께 유관기관과 데이터 협업체계를 구축하고 상시 수요조사를 위한 온라인 창구를 개설하여 다양한 의견을 수렴할 계획입니다. 다음으로 조달 데이터 허브 구축 및 관리 강화입니다. 개방 활용 시스템이 4개로 분산 운영되어 유기적이고 통합적인 정보 제공에 한계가 있고 검색 조건에 따라 추출 데이터도 미세한 차이가 발생하는 문제가 있었습니다. 저희는 이들 시스템을 통합한 조달 데이터 허브 시스템을 구축하고 유사하거나 중복되는 보고서 통폐합 등을 통해 데이터의 일관성, 정합성을 확보할 예정입니다. 이와 함께 해당 허브 시스템 사용자들이 시스템에서 본인이 원하는 빅데이터 분석을 직접 진행할 수 있도록 셀프 분석 환경도 제공할 계획입니다. 그리고 기업별 실적이나 기술인 정보와 같은 기업 정보, 그리고 인증, 성적서와 같은 상품 정보, 그리고 거래 가격과 같은 가격 정보가 시스템별로 분산되어서 이용자의 사용에 애로가 있었는데, 이를 해결하기 위해 흩어져 있는 기업, 상품, 가격 데이터에 대해 분야별 DB를 구축하여 조회부터 활용까지 원스톱으로 제공할 계획입니다. 데이터의 소재 정보, 연관관계 등에 대한 안내 부족으로 발생하는 비전문가의 데이터 활용 한계를 극복하고자 일반 용어 기반 데이터 카탈로그 그리고 데이터 맵 마련 제공을 통해 이용자의 편의성을 제고할 계획입니다. 최근 데이터 개방이 확대됨에 따라서 개인정보 유출에 대한 우려가 있습니다. 앞으로는 개인정보 식별 관리 시스템을 구축하고 보안 체계를 고도화하여 개인정보 판단 업무를 체계화할 계획입니다. 네. 다음 데이터 개방 활용 성과 창출 가속화입니다. 앞서 말씀드렸다시피 파일 데이터 81종, 오픈 API 18종, 빅데이터 분석 보고서 57종, 그리고 조달 통계 73종을 공개하고 있습니다. 이렇게 다양한 데이터를 공개하고 있으나 사용자들은 연구나 정책 결정, 민간 비즈니스 창출을 위한 데이터는 부족하다는 의견이 많이 있습니다. 앞으로는 개인정보 보호와 같은 특별한 사유가 없는 한 생산, 수집되는 데이터를 모두 개방하고 사용자 체감형 개방 데이터, 빅데이터 분석, 통계를 지속적으로 발굴하는 한편 데이터 시각화 서비스를 확대하고 빅데이터 분석 컨설팅 제공을 통해서 조달 데이터의 활용을 지원할 계획입니다. 현재 계약 심사 업무 상당수가 단순하고 반복적인 과정임에도 데이터가 부족하여 수기로 진행하는 부분이 많이 있습니다. 앞으로는 필요한 모든 데이터를 확보하고 RPA와 AI를 적용하여 업무 자동화를 추진할 예정입니다. AI를 활용한 서비스 개선건의 경우 앞서 파일럿 분석한 사례들을 소개드렸는데 아직 상용화되지 못해서 사례가 거의 없다고 볼 수 있습니다. 앞으로는 사용자가 체감할 수 있는 다양한 서비스 모델을 개발해서 다수 제공할 예정입니다. 최근 국내에서는 데이터 거래 활성화를 위한 정책들이 마련되고 있는데요. 다른 분야의 데이터 거래 활성화 움직임과 달리 조달 분야에서는 데이터 거래가 거의 없습니다. 앞으로는 데이터를 공급하는 기업의 사업 전략 수립 지원을 위해서 공공기관의 조달 관련 데이터 구매 수요를 조사하여 발표하고 원천 데이터를 맞춤형으로 제공하여 원활한 그 데이터 거래 환경을 조성할 예정입니다. 현재 조달청에서는 이메일이나 SMS를 통해서 기업이나 기관 등 이용자에게 알림 서비스를 제공 중입니다. 예를 들어 기업의 경우 원하는 공고 조건, 공고 분야, 공고 금액 정보를 입력해두면 해당 조건에 부합하는 해당 입찰 공고가 등록될 경우 알려주는 서비스입니다. 다만 이 서비스의 범위가 특정 분야에 한정되어 있어서 실효성이 조금 부족한 상황입니다. 앞으로는 사용자의 비정형 행동 분석 등을 통해서 수요자 맞춤형 데이터를 선별하여 선제적으로 제공하고 민간 앱을 통한 알림 서비스 도입을 검토할 예정입니다. 네, 이상으로 발표를 마치겠습니다.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Gong. Korea has recently enacted the world's first data basic law. So it stipulates various policy and supports to promote the use of the private and public data, also data transaction. Through Mr. Gong's presentation, we are able to understand Korean's experience and data management. I think data visualizations is just considered to be important matters because it can enhance the understand and the convenience of the users. So now we all three distinguished speakers finished their presentations. I'd like to have an audience engaged in fully in the discussion and Q&A. So your comments, advice or questions or any other input would be appreciated. In order to give audience time to think about your comment, I would like to ask some questions to the speaker first. Firstly, I would like to ask a question to the Mr. Lee. SMEs are already struggling to enter the government procurement market of their own respective country. So it seems to be obvious those SME will have greater difficulties to joining international procurement market. So considering anticipated hurdles such as joining the bid process or customs the clearance and the required certifications. So with regard to these matters, could you elaborate on how to use ITC analytics the tools based on trade information?
Yeah, thank you for your question. There's a comprehensive solution for companies who really want to have a glimpse on a certain market that we call Global Trade Help Desk. It stands out among ITC's trade market intelligences because it provides companies with almost every important information about how a company of A country can export to B country. I think companies who want to penetrate international public procurement market should check it out. Actually, the picture I attached on page number 14, I've already presented you, is interwoven with contents from the Global Trade Help Desk. When a user make a query for the information regarding exports from Switzerland to Korea, I'd like to suggest is that companies try procurement mappers for identifying tenders, and then they should check about necessary things for international trade. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I give you another questions. As stated in EU case you introduced in the presentations, direct advance made by a foreign supplier into EU procurement market takes up to just 2%. Even if combined with the cases introducing through the participation in supply chains or commercial presence, the figure remains as low as 10%. So it seems that meticulous surveys prior to going into overseas procurement market need to be made. So in this regard, do you have any comment on it?
Yeah, actually correct. About 2% is the rate of direct penetration in EU public procurement market. It's quite small, and given that this small rate included penetrations among European countries or the third countries outside of EU, the actual numbers seem to really small to give it a try. And because commercial presence is not affordable to many SMEs, as you said, every SMEs who desperately want to export their product to international public procurement market should consider value-added modes. This may lead to a difficult stage with some unsolved problems because there's no solid statistics on value-added trade and procurement as well. In ITC, there's an effort ongoing to figure out this value-added trade information for a certain region. I hope it would be helpful to the public procurement penetration in the future. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, I'd like to share the more information about the OCP, Ms. Xiaomi. So you introduced the data use cases of the OCP. I think it's very impressive. I wonder about the data disclosure. If OCP has data disclosure policy, so supplier or any private sectors can use data. So would you let us know about your policy? Also, if you OCP has any future plan to invest for data, utilization, any infrastructure, please briefly explain that. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. So that was a very good question indeed. In terms of data disclosure policy, so for OCP, because we work with government, businesses, and civil society across the world, we do understand that every country have their own privacy law and access to information law. So we do believe that we push for greater openness. So, open source and then open access for everyone. Having said that, every country would have different take on their current situation. What we normally do is that for the open contracting data standard, there is only a few required fields that needs to be disclosed, just to help enable the public to help monitor it. For example, like tender duration. So some things that are not necessarily affect privacy information, private information like personal information. So that's one on disclosure policy. We do leave it to each country to decide to the extent of openness that they do want to disclose. Of course, the better it is, the more data that is available, it would also help every stakeholders. For example, because when you're talking about collaboration between government, civil society, and civic tech organization and businesses, when government does open their data sets because they believe that civic tech organization or businesses can also help analyze the data sets for themselves. If the data are limited, then they can't analyze it, right? Like many examples that were shared previously. And when on your questions whether OCP has any future plan to invest for data utilization in infrastructure, is actually one of our thematic focus, that we do believe that infrastructure is the big chunk of public spending. So we work with stakeholders who want to reform their infrastructure processes. We don't push for everyone to make sure that it's implemented. We work with those who want to do it. Of course, we advocate for it. And then if we have plans to work with for example, businesses like Chamber of Commerce or infrastructure or construction company and any regional or international networks who have focus on infrastructure like the Global Infrastructure Hub. One of them would be speaking in tomorrow's session, I believe. So yeah, if you ask whether we have any future plan to invest, we do, but the way we invest is we help those who want to change themselves and the procurement system and their policy for the better in the future, for a more sustainable effort.
Thank you very much, Ms. Chong, your kind explanation. Now move on to the Mr. Gong. 한국말로 하겠습니다. 조달 프로세스에서는요, 이제 입찰이 있고, 텐더, 그다음 계약, 컨트랙팅, 그다음에 대금 지급, 페이먼트 이 세 가지가 이제 순서대로 이루어지는데 현재 아까 발표에 따르면은 조달청에서 이제 여러 통계를 제공하는데 입찰, 계약 요 두 가지 한정해서 지금 제공되고 있는데요. 혹시 그 페이먼트, 대금 지급과 관련된 통계 계획은 작성할 계획은 없는지 그게 궁금합니다.
네, 좋은 질문 감사드립니다. 지금 현재 관련 법령상으로 조달 통계 작성 범위가 계약 통계로 한정이 되어 있습니다. 현재 조달 통계의 작성 범위를 기존 계약 통계에서 대금 지급까지 확대하기 위한 법령 개정을 준비하고 있습니다. 아마 올해 안으로 개정이 될 것으로 예상이 됩니다. 이와 함께 현재 나라장터 2002년 구축된 나라장터를 전면 개편하는 차세대 나라장터가 2024년에 개통될 예정입니다. 이때 시스템 개선을 통해서 대금 지급 정보를 수집해서 통계로 작성, 제공할 계획이 있습니다.
네, 뭐 하나 더 질문을 드리면 그 혹시 빅데이터 컨설팅 관련해서 좀 계획 중인 그 컨설팅의 대상, 뭐 내용, 뭐 구체적인 계획이 있는지 간단히 좀 부탁드리겠습니다.
빅데이터 분석 컨설팅의 대상은 수요기관 그리고 조달 기업으로 하고 있습니다. 컨설팅의 경우 첫 번째 데이터의 제공, 두 번째 분석 기획, 세 번째 분석 서비스 제공 등 세 가지로 구분해서 사용자의 수준에 따라 맞춤형으로 제공할 예정입니다. 분석 능력이 충분한 사용자는 조달청이 단순 데이터를 제공하는 것만으로도 만족도가 높을 것이고요. 역량이 부족한 사용자에게는 데이터 제공부터 분석 기획 그리고 실제 분석 서비스까지 모든 서비스를 제공할 예정입니다. 예상되는 컨설팅 서비스로는 지역별 물품 수요 분석 등을 통한 공장 혹은 창고 입지 분석, 창업 벤처 기업 혹은 중소기업의 공공 분야 매출액 향상 방안 등을 예상하고 있습니다.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gong. Since there's no more questions and comments from the audience, so let's wrap up our second session. In this session, in-depth talks and experience were shared on the use of data and information in the field of international procurement. So many thanks to the three speakers for your wonderful presentation, and also thanks to the audience who listened and participated in the end. So thank you so much.
Thank you, session chair and panelists, for excellent moderation, presentations, and profound discussions. Before we wrap up today's event, there's one quick housekeeping note. The Secretariat of this workshop is conducting a satisfaction survey of participants. You can join the survey at our official website. The survey results will be used for next year's workshop. We would kindly ask for your interest and participation. Well, now, we have come to an end of today's program. Tomorrow, the third and fourth sessions will get started at 9 a.m. in London local time and 5 p.m. in Seoul local time. The session 3 will take place under the theme of Build Better, Build Right, Bit by Bit. And session 4 will cover setting the sustainability standard for public procurement. Once again, we'd like to extend our gratitude to all the participants for staying. Thank you.